Yates, there is something happening inside certain people right now, maybe inside someone sitting across from you at dinner tonight. Radiates. Maybe inside someone who texts you back within seconds and still shows up every single time you need them, and you have absolutely no idea it is happening. They are leaving, not packing bags. Radiates. Not having the conversation, not giving you any of the signals that your brain has been trained to associate with someone walking out of your life. Yates. They are leaving in the only place that actually matters first. They are leaving in their mind. And by the time their body follows, by the time you actually feel the absence, Yates. By the time you reach out and something feels different and you cannot quite name what it is, the real departure happened months ago, maybe longer. Radiates. And you were there for all of it and you saw none of it. This is not about dramatic breakups. This is not about people who ghost you overnight or explode and disappear. Radiates. This is about something far more quiet and far more permanent. This is about what happens inside the nervous system of a person who feels everything, who has been feeling everything. Idiots. Who has been absorbing the emotional weight of a relationship or a friendship or a family dynamic for so long that their inner world has quietly and completely reorganized itself around the reality that you are not who they needed you to be. Idiots. And they have accepted that fully, without telling you, without a fight, without an ultimatum. They accepted it in the dark alone. Radiates. Probably at 2 a.m. when something you did or didn't do finally broke through the last layer of hope they were still holding on to. And they cried about it, or maybe they didn't even cry anymore because they were too tired to cry, and then they got up the next morning and they showed up anyway. Still present, still warm enough on the surface. Radiates, but fundamentally changed in a way you cannot see because you were never paying close enough attention to notice the difference. Yates. I want to talk about what is actually happening neurologically when this process begins, because most people think of emotional detachment as a decision. Yates. They think someone wakes up one day and decides to stop caring. That is not how this works. Not with people who are deeply empathically wired. What actually happens is closer to a survival response. When a person has repeatedly extended emotional vulnerability, real vulnerability, the kind that costs something, and has repeatedly received either nothing in return or worse, idiots, has had that vulnerability used against them, minimized, ignored, or responded to with emotional unavailability, the brain begins to adapt. It begins to build protective architecture. Radiates. Not because the person chose to stop feeling, but because the system that was designed to keep them alive and functional cannot sustain indefinite output with no input. The detachment is not a choice. It is a consequence. It is the mind doing what the heart refused to do for far too long. Radiates. There is research out of UCLA on what happens in the brain when people experience repeated social rejection or emotional dismissal. The same neural pathways that process physical pain are activated. Yates. The anterior cingulate cortex, the same region that lights up when you burn your hand or break a bone, responds to social and emotional rejection in a profoundly similar way. Radiates. So when you keep dismissing someone's emotional needs, when you keep being unavailable, when you keep failing to show up in the ways that matter, you are not just being a little neglectful. Radiates. You are activating pain responses in their nervous system over and over again. And the brain, which is extraordinarily good at learning, begins to associate you with that pain. Yates. And it begins to protect the person from you, even while they are still sitting next to you. Yates. The mental departure has specific stages, and if you know what to look for, you can see it happening in real time, but most people don't know what to look for, so they miss every single stage until it is too late. Radiates. The first thing that happens is what psychologists call anticipatory grieving. The empath begins to grieve the relationship before it ends. Yates. They start processing the loss while the relationship is technically still intact. They begin emotionally preparing themselves for a future without you. Radiates. Not because they have decided to leave, but because somewhere in the deep processing part of their brain, they have already calculated that this is where it is heading. Radiates. They might still be fully present in your daily life during this stage, still texting you, still showing up, still going through the motions, but internally they have started rehearsing life without you. Idiots. They are starting to imagine their routines without your presence in them. They are quietly, almost unconsciously, idiots, beginning to detach the structures of their inner world from the assumption of your continued presence. The second stage is the reduction of investment. The idiots, and this one is subtle enough that almost nobody catches it in real time. The empath stops bringing new things to you. They stop sharing new thoughts, new vulnerabilities, new hopes, new fears. Radiates. The conversations start to stay at surface level, not because they have nothing to say, they always have something to say, but because they have stopped trusting you with the things that matter. Yates. They used to tell you everything. The weird thought they had at 3 p.m, the small win they were embarrassed to be proud of, the fear they had not said out loud to anyone else. Yates. And now they are still talking to you, but they are giving you the version of themselves that requires the least amount of risk. They have started rationing their realness. Yates. And because most people were never paying attention to the depth of what they were receiving in the first place, they don't notice that the depth is gone. Yates. They just notice the conversation feels slightly more hollow, and they chalk it up to the other person being tired or stressed or distracted. The third stage is the rerouting of emotional energy. D8s. This is where the empath stops spending their emotional bandwidth on you and starts putting it somewhere else, maybe into their work, maybe into a friendship you have never heard them talk about before. D8s. Maybe into a creative project, maybe just into themselves for the first time in years. And you will notice if you are paying attention that they seem different, fuller somehow, more settled. A88s, less anxious to please you, less reactive to your moods. And here is the deeply uncomfortable irony of this stage. Most people interpret this as a good sign. They think the person seems better, happier. D8s, more relaxed, and they feel relieved. They do not realize that the reason the empath seems lighter is because they have quietly put you down. D8s, they have stopped carrying the weight of managing your emotional world, and they have started reclaiming that energy for themselves. The relief you are observing is not the relationship getting healthier. Radiates, it is the relationship becoming increasingly irrelevant to their sense of self. The fourth stage is the goodbye that happens in private. This is the one that is the most painful to understand after the fact. The empath reaches a moment, usually alone, usually quiet, where they internally close the chapter. They do not always know consciously that this is what is happening. It might feel like clarity. It might feel like peace after a long period of turbulence. It might feel like waking up one morning and just knowing something that they somehow were not ready to know before. And in that moment, radiates, in that private internal ceremony that you were not invited to and will never fully know happened, they let you go. Not with anger, not with bitterness, with something closer to sorrow and acceptance. D8s. The grief has been processed across all those previous stages, and now what remains is just the quiet resolution. And from the outside, you will notice nothing. They will still be there, still functional, still kind. But the decision has been made at the deepest level, and it is permanent. Radiates. What makes this particularly hard for the people on the receiving end is that empaths are extraordinarily good at continuing to function within a relationship they have already internally exited. Radiates. They are not doing this to manipulate you. They are doing it because they are conflict averse, because they genuinely care about not causing unnecessary pain. Radiates. Because they have spent so long prioritizing other people's emotional comfort over their own truth that continuing to show up even when they have already left feels more natural to them than the confrontation that honesty would require. Eights. They will still show up to the thing you invited them to. They will still respond to your messages. They will still be relatively warm and present when you are actually in front of them. Radiates. But the connection that was there before, the specific quality of their attention, the way they used to make you feel like the most important thing in the room, that is gone. Idiots, and eventually you will feel it. But by then they are already so far down the road of having moved on internally that there is almost nothing you can do to close the gap. Idiots. I want to talk about why this pattern exists in the first place, because it does not come from nowhere. Idiots. Most empaths grew up in environments where their emotional needs were either actively dismissed or simply never modeled as being valid. They learned early that the way to be loved was to be useful. Idiots. To be the one who noticed what others needed. To be the peacemaker, the fixer, the person who made everything easier for everyone around them. And they got very good at that. And they got rewarded for it. Yates, not with the kind of deep relational reciprocity they actually needed, but with the kind of surface level appreciation that kept them just attached enough to keep performing the role. And so the pattern calcified. Give. Feel the emptiness of not receiving. Override the emptiness with more giving. And when they finally reach a point where they cannot override it anymore, Yates, when the emptiness has become too loud to talk over, they do the only thing their nervous system knows how to do without causing a rupture. They leave quietly, in their mind first. Always in their mind first. Radiates. There is a concept I want to introduce here that I think is one of the most important things to understand about how empaths process relationships, and that is the concept of the hope cycle. D8s. When an empath cares about someone, they do not just experience the relationship as it is. They experience the relationship as it could be. They hold a vision of what this person is capable of being. D8s. What this connection could become if the other person would just do a little of the work, if they would just wake up slightly, if they would just meet them even partway. Radiates. And the empath will sustain an enormous amount of disappointment and pain as long as that hope remains alive. As long as they can still see the potential, they will stay. They will absorb. D8s. They will keep going. The hope is both the thing that makes them so extraordinary to be loved by and the thing that keeps them in dynamics far past the point where most people would have walked away. But hope is not infinite. It has a threshold. And when enough accumulated evidence finally crosses that threshold, radiates. When the pattern of disappointment becomes undeniable even to the most optimistic part of their nature, the hope dies. And when the hope dies, the mental departure begins. And nothing you say or do after that point will reignite what has already gone out. Because they are not leaving because they stopped believing in you in a moment. They are leaving because they spent years believing in you past every reason not to, and you still never showed up. D8s. Now I want to speak specifically to anyone listening to this who recognizes themselves as the person who was left behind in this way. E8s. Who has experienced the baffling and disorienting sensation of someone they thought was solid and permanent in their life suddenly feeling very far away even when they are standing right in front of you? Radiates. Here is what I need you to understand. The confusion you feel is real. The sense of something being wrong that you cannot name is real. Radiates. But the most dangerous thing you can do at this point is perform urgency without substance. What I mean by that is this. When people feel someone pulling away, they very often go into panic mode. They start showing up more, calling more, saying the right things, making gestures. Radiates, doing the things they were supposed to have been doing all along, but are now only doing because they can feel the loss approaching. And the empath, E8s, who can feel the difference between someone who has genuinely changed and someone who is performing change to stop them from leaving, will see through it immediately. It will not land E8s. It will actually confirm what they already know, because the desperation is still about you, still about your fear of loss, still not about them. And what they needed, 88s, what they needed for all those months and years before they reached this point was for something to be about them for once. Radiates. The only thing that has any chance of reaching someone at this stage is radical honesty combined with radical patience combined with zero expectation of return. Radiates. You would have to genuinely reckon with what you took for granted. Not in a conversation designed to get them back. In a private, real D8s, unflinching inventory of how you participated in the dynamic that drove them to this point. And then you would have to change. Actually change, not the surface behavior, the internal structure. Radiates the way you relate to other people's emotional needs, the way you register reciprocity or your lack of it. Radiates the way you treat access to a genuinely caring person as a resource that can be endlessly drawn from without ever being replenished. That kind of change is possible. Eights. But it is deep and slow and uncomfortable, and most people do not do it because it is easier to find someone new who has not yet seen the pattern. For the empaths listening, radiates. I want you to hear this next part not as permission to become harder or colder or to preemptively close yourself off from people out of fear of being drained, because that is not the answer either. The answer is something more precise than that. The answer is discernment, the ability to tell the difference early, E8s, between someone who is emotionally unavailable and growing toward availability and someone who is emotionally unavailable and has no interest in changing, E8s. That distinction will save you years of invisible labor. That distinction is something you can develop if you are willing to slow down the process of attaching. If you are willing to let people show you who they are through patterns over time rather than through their best moments in isolation. You are not obligated to carry everyone. Idiots. You are not obligated to love people into their potential at the cost of yourself. Your depth is sacred, and it belongs with people who are at least trying to meet it. D8s. The mental departure of an empath is one of the saddest and most misunderstood things that happens in human relationships. Sad because it so often happens in complete silence. Sad because the person leaving has almost always tried, in ways the other person never fully saw, to signal what they needed before they reached the point of no return. D8s. And misunderstood because from the outside it can look like coldness or withdrawal or even cruelty, when in reality it is the final and most exhausted act of self-preservation that a person who spent their entire relational life putting themselves last is capable of performing. D8s. They are not leaving because they are cold. They are leaving because they were warm for too long, for too little, and their system finally protected them in the only way it knew how. D8s. And if you are sitting somewhere right now knowing that you are already in that process, knowing that you have already started the quiet departure, already rerouted your energy, radiates, already closed the chapter in the dark, I want you to know that what you are doing is not a failure. It is not giving up. It is not something to be ashamed of. Radiates. It is evidence of a nervous system that finally decided you were worth protecting. And wherever you land when the physical catches up to the mental, whatever comes next, D8s. Whatever chapter begins after the one you are quietly closing right now, you are going to bring all of that depth and all of that capacity for love and all of that extraordinary attunement with you. D8s. And somewhere out there is a person or a group of people who will not make you leave in pieces, who will not require you to ghost yourself in order to stay. D8s. And that is where all of this was always supposed to lead, not to less love, to the right place for all of it. They were already gone before you felt the silence, and the silence was not the end of them. It was the beginning of themselves.